Hey Doc Squad, Dr. White here with the Business Analysis Doctor. Today, I'm giving a tutorial on conducting requirements workshop using JAD sessions. But before we get started, if you want more business analysis training and tips, be sure to subscribe to the page and turn on the notification bell. With that said, let's get started. Requirement workshops are one of the most widely used elicitation techniques for business analysts across the globe. This approach is increasing in popularity as many organizations have an increased focus on collaborative methods. Let's look at what you'll learn in this lesson. First, we'll talk about what a requirements workshop is. Then we'll discuss what a JAD session is. We'll look at the key roles of a requirements workshop, the components of a requirements workshop. Then we'll take a look at some requirements workshop best practices, and then we'll take a look at an example requirements workshop agenda. So what is a requirements workshop? A requirements workshop is a focused requirements elicitation event that gathers key stakeholders and subject matter experts for the purpose of collaborating to produce a requirements-related work product or to make key requirements-related decisions. What is JAD? JAD is an acronym for Joint Application Development, also referred to as Joint Application Design. A JAD session is a type of workshop typically structured to include participation of the key business stakeholders as well as the key IT stakeholders. The goal of a JAD session is to develop consensus-based requirements and designs. Now let's look at some key roles. The key roles for an effective requirements or JAD session includes facilitator, scribe, timekeeper, and participants. The facilitator is generally a neutral party who plans the workshop, defines the goals, agenda, and expected outcomes. This role also provides guidance and structure, maintains focus on the desired outcomes, guides decision-making, and ensures that all participants have an opportunity to participate. The facilitator should not perform the scribe or timekeeping duties while facilitating. Those roles should be filled by separate participants. In most cases, a business analyst will act as a facilitator in a JAD session or any type of requirements workshop. The scribe records key activities and decisions in a predetermined format and tracks any items or issues that need to be revisited. The timekeeper tracks and records the time spent on each agenda item. The scribe often serves as the timekeeper as well. As mentioned earlier, a JAD session is a unique type of requirements workshop because it's based on a consensus from both the business and technical stakeholders. Therefore, the active participants will be business stakeholders and IT representatives. The participants involved in the JAD session may vary by organization and by product, but here are some of the most critical JAD session participants. The sponsor is the person who drives and champions the project. The role of the sponsor varies from organization to organization. The sponsor usually sets the project tone in the kickoff meeting, conveying the goals and objectives for the initiatives. Some organizations prefer to have the sponsor attend the kickoff session and then leave. In other organizations, the sponsor is involved in most of the collaborative sessions. A sponsor normally holds an executive position and is able to make high-level decisions and provide the necessary strategy and direction for the JAD session. In many cases, the sponsor won't be able to make the project meetings, so they may delegate decision-making authority to higher-level SMEs. In some environments, the sponsor may even serve as an escalation point for the project. Generally, in agile environments, the product owner will act on the sponsor's behalf. Next, we have the subject matter experts, or SMEs. These are stakeholders with specific business or domain knowledge related to the project. This role is absolutely key to the success of the JAD session because they provide critical information. A subject matter expert might be a business manager, process owner, consultant, or other roles with relevant business knowledge. End users are stakeholders who directly interact with the current or future solution. End users can include participants in the business process or individuals who use the product. While these participants are key to ensuring the product that's built is usable, these participants do not have decision-making authority. Their role is to provide information and insight regarding the current solution, as well as their opinions regarding the future solution. It's also important for an IT representative to be at the JAD session. This allows the technical team to gain an understanding of the project goal and to understand what they'll need to do. Developers are usually selected to represent IT for the JAD sessions. Developers don't play a major role in the early JAD sessions. Their role is to understand what the requirements are and to consider feasibility so that the team doesn't get too attached to an idea that cannot be delivered. Developers should, however, play a major role and possibly lead downstream JAD sessions that deal with design aspects and implementation of the solution. When the team discusses potential solutions to make the product less abstract, there may be some prototyping or wireframing involved. The developers will play a key role in creating and presenting those while keeping the focus on the what, not the how. For earlier JAD sessions, it's generally best to minimize the number of developers so that they don't outweigh the business stakeholders from a ratio perspective. Now let's look at the main components. All requirements have three overarching processes, which include prepare, conduct, and wrap up. Planning and preparation are essential to a successful workshop or JAD session. Some activities that a business analyst will consider when planning a workshop include the following. Pre-workshop elicitation is often required to generate some key inputs for the workshop. For a JAD session, the business need and scope should be clearly defined, and if possible, a list of high-level features would also be beneficial. A document analysis is a common initial elicitation activity to review documents such as the business case, vision statement, scope statement, etc. The business analyst may also need to conduct pre-workshop interviews with key stakeholders to ensure that these inputs are well-defined and understood. The BA may also have some interviews or brainstorming sessions to generate a list of stakeholders that need to be involved in the JAD session. Defining the objectives and outcomes will be absolutely critical for the success of the requirements workshop. This will set the tone for all of the other preparation activities that follow. As the facilitator, you'll need to understand and communicate exactly what the group of stakeholders need to work on during the workshop, and communicate the expected deliverable to be derived from this collaborative work, which is the outcome. Generally for JAD sessions, the outcomes are a rough draft work product such as stakeholder requirements, functional and non-functional requirements, user stories, acceptance criteria, process maps, diagrams, or it can even be requirement-related decisions. For post-requirement JAD sessions, work products might include wireframes, prototypes, or other types of design documents. Now you'll want to identify the stakeholders that need to attend the requirements workshop or JAD session. If you're not yet sure who all the relevant stakeholders are, you can refer to some of the project initiation documents, such as the business case or project charter, to get a list of individuals who may be listed. If this isn't available, you can generally start by sharing the workshop objectives with the sponsor and the project manager to get a preliminary list of stakeholders that will be best to help achieve those goals, and then identify additional stakeholders through research as you prepare for the event. Once you've identified the stakeholders that need to attend, you'll need to recruit your scribe and timekeeper. You may start by asking for volunteers, or you can simply approach someone who is attending the workshop that you have a good relationship with and is likely to be effective at the role. Be sure to have these roles established prior to the workshop and not during. While it's generally best for the facilitator not to perform the timekeeping and scribe responsibilities, this may be required if resources are limited. Selecting the appropriate technique for a requirements workshop or JAD session will be essential for achieving optimal outcomes for the event. Here, You want to consider the objectives for the workshop and then think about the business analysis or elicitation techniques that will best facilitate those objectives. Though a requirement workshop is considered an elicitation technique itself, there are a number of techniques that could be used during the workshop based on the goals and objectives. For a JAD session, some common elicitation techniques used during the event might be brainstorming, group interviews, process analysis, walkthrough review, functional decomposition, prototyping, and decision analysis. The most essential activity for preparing any type of workshop is creating the agenda. In most cases, requirement workshops will require the participants to be together for an extended period of time, so there will need to be a detailed guide to keep the session moving and to keep everything on track. Generally, it's best to create an agenda that can be used during and prior to the workshop. With that said, you'll want to send out the agenda to the participants early. If you've already vexed your elicitation questions and want to include the questionnaire, you may want to send out the material a week in advance. For agendas not accompanied by a questionnaire, 3 days should be fine, but it should definitely be sent out at least 24 hours in advance. We'll take a look at a detailed agenda example later on in the lesson. Logistics are the key details of the meeting that provides information to enable the meeting to run smoothly. These are planned prior to the workshop and include identifying many of the items previously discussed, such as workshop goals, participants and their goals, and techniques. But some other key logistics include scheduling rooms, reserving audio-visual tools or other equipment, determining locations of the workshop if it's held off-site, finding dates and times that work well for all attendees, and setting the meeting for an appropriate length of time. Now it's time to conduct the requirements workshop. Upon starting the workshop, it's often needed to make sure that all participants are aware of the purpose, expected outcomes, and ground rules of the meeting. Even though these components are included in the agenda that was previously sent, there may be attendees who did not review the documentation. It may also be necessary to do introductions or icebreakers if the participants are not acquainted with one another. The components for conducting successful workshops include the following. Conveying the purpose of the workshop tells the participants exactly what they'll be working on during the session and the expected deliverable to be derived from the collaborative work. Again, these are the objectives and outcomes. Establishing ground rules sets the behavioral tone for the requirements workshop to help it run efficiently. Ground rules can include respecting the opinions of other participants, required contribution from all stakeholders, discussing off-topic issues briefly and then putting them on a parking lot list, and forming an agreement on how decisions are made. Following the agenda helps the meeting flow efficiently. Requirement workshops generally have several agenda items to get through, so the agenda will be critical for covering all items as intended. Each agenda item should be time-boxed respectively. This is where the timekeeper role becomes essential, especially if the agenda is complex. Multiple elicitation techniques may be used during the workshop according to the objective and outcomes. This is where the business analyst or facilitator would use the questionnaire mentioned previously to guide the elicitation. In some cases, conversations may not go as expected, and the facilitator may need to incorporate unplanned elicitation techniques as well. The typical elicitation techniques used during JAD sessions were discussed earlier in the Prepare section. Maintaining focus is often a challenge for requirement workshops. In addition to following the agenda, the facilitator will need to guard against getting sidetracked by unrelated issues. A parking lot list is a good tool for this. A parking lot list is a method used to keep meetings on track by deferring and tracking important issues that arise but don't directly relate to the current topic. These items are listed for discussion at a later time. For JAD sessions, a consideration when including IT representatives is that their nature is to discuss and think about implementation. So, from time to time, the facilitator may need to remind them to focus on the what aspect of the requirements, not the how. Next, summarizing key points toward the end of the session is a good way to confirm that everyone is on the same page in terms of commitments and progress. This is also the appropriate time to reiterate key outcomes and decisions made during the requirements workshop. This summary will also be a key input into the post-session wrap-up activities that will follow the session. It's rare to achieve all of the desired objectives in one JAD session or requirements workshop, so multiple sessions are often required. This is where action items come into play. During each requirements workshop, it's likely that some required outside activities are uncovered during the discussion, so those activities will need to be captured so they are not forgotten about. This is a key responsibility of the scribe. The scribe must capture any action item that may need to be completed prior to the next session, while the facilitator will need to ensure that the responsible parties are assigned for the action item and that the agreed upon due dates are given to each of them. Now let's look at post-session wrap-up. The facilitator should follow up with the attendees as early as possible following the session so that the information is still fresh in the participant's mind. The following activities are key to requirements workshop wrap-up. Organizing notes will be one of the first steps following the requirements workshop. This information will be used to supplement the requirements that have been drafted during the requirements workshops. So you'll want to organize the information so that it can be easily confirmed by the individual stakeholders prior to distribution. Since the requirement workshops or JAD sessions will be producing requirement work products, the business analyst can begin analyzing the requirements by performing verification and validation activities. These activities may require additional JAD sessions or other elicitation activities downstream. Wrap-up also includes following up with participants regarding any action items they're responsible for. The facilitator may want to reiterate some commitments made or check in on the progress of the action item if it's an input for future requirement workshops. After individual stakeholders have confirmed the information related to them, the facilitator should distribute the notes to all attendees for their records. Also, the work products should be distributed to the attendees after the business analyst has been able to analyze the associated requirements for that deliverable. And finally, the facilitator should ask for feedback regarding the deliverables that are distributed, as well as suggestions for improving the overall JAD session or requirement workshop process. Before we take a look at our sample agenda, let's take a look at some best practices for running a JAD session or requirements workshop. First, be sure to perform a current state or situation analysis prior to the first session. This will give you the context you need to create proper objectives for the workshop, as well as develop relevant questions for the elicitation questionnaire. A current state analysis will also help you identify the proper stakeholders for the workshop. As previously mentioned, be sure to have a clear purpose for the session. This will include the workshop objectives and expected outcomes. Determine the work products or deliverables prior to the session. This will help set the direction of the workshop and will be a key factor for establishing the expected outcome for the session. The output work products for a requirements-focused JAD session should also be the inputs for JAD sessions focused on design and implementation. Include a maximum of 12 participants. A manageable size for a requirements workshop is around 6 to 12 participants. This range tends to be large enough for decent engagement and adequate requirements coverage. But having more participants than this may be too chaotic and unmanageable. Also, be sure to assign roles and responsibilities prior to the meeting. Asking for volunteers to scribe or keep time during this session can take away from the workshop schedule, and catching the participants off guard might be off-putting to some of them. Send out the agenda at least 24 hours in advance. As mentioned previously, sending out the agenda 3 to 7 days is optimal, but the agenda should definitely be sent 24 hours in advance as a bare minimum. And finally, use a questionnaire during the requirements workshop to guide the elicitation. This will help ensure that you ask all of the intended questions and will also help in keeping the discussion moving. If practical, it may be beneficial to send the questionnaire in advance along with the workshop agenda. Now let's take a look at an example agenda for a requirements workshop using joint application development. In the case study here, I'll be facilitating a JAD session for a project to implement an automated workflow application. A typical agenda has two main components: a meeting description section and an activity description section. In the meeting description section, we include the type of meeting to give the participants a high-level indication of what to expect. In this case, we'll be conducting a requirements workshop using Joint Application Development, or JAD. Then we include the project that the workshop is for. This is to help participants who may be involved in multiple projects keep track of which initiative this is for. As you can see here, I've listed our case study project, which is Automated Workflow Implementation. Then we have our key roles, including the facilitator, scribe, and timekeeper. Having these roles listed on the agenda not only gives recognition, but it also helps keep them accountable during the session. Now we have the attendee list. Since we're conducting a JAD session, participation will be required from a mix of business and IT stakeholders. Then we have some meeting instructions to help ensure that the stakeholders come to the requirements workshop as prepared as possible. This includes what they need to read and review prior to the session, as well as material to bring for activities during the session. Now let's take a look at the activity description section. This is where all of our agenda items are itemized and detailed. The key components here are the time box for each item, the agenda item label, and the description of the item. For the agenda item label, I like to include who will be responsible for and involved in the agenda item, so the participants will know what they're responsible for in the workshop. It's also a good idea to include a description of each agenda item to remove ambiguity and further clarify the expectation for the requirement workshop. This will also help the participants prepare for the sessions and ensure that they have sufficient information and resources. So let's take a look at our agenda items for our case study. As you can see, each agenda item is time boxed. The first agenda item will be the kickoff and introduction. This will be a tag team effort by the facilitator and the sponsor. This will include sharing the agenda, communicating the purpose and expected outcomes of the workshop, and then advising what the ground rules are. The next item is reviewing and prioritizing the feature list. Here, we'll be confirming the features derived from previously developed documents such as the business case, as well as pre-workshop interviews. If you can recall, the Please Read section of the agenda did include the business case and feature list, so the stakeholders should have some previous exposure to these documents. This agenda item also includes prioritizing the features. Note that the item description also advises of the technique that I'll be using to execute the item. Here, I'll be using the Moscow method. If some stakeholders are not familiar with this technique, I would take a few minutes to go ahead and explain it. After we've confirmed and prioritized the features, we need to break them down at the user level. Here, we'll use functional decomposition to break down the features into stakeholder requirements, which are one-sentence statements that describe the user needs that compose each feature. For this activity, only the business stakeholders should be participating, and each stakeholder should focus on requirements that represent their respective user group. Here, a business analyst would definitely benefit from having the elicitation questionnaire handy to ensure completeness. Generally, the 5 Ws and an H method works well, with who, what, and why focus questions being the main focus. If the team is working in an agile environment, this would consist of decomposing the features into stories, which is known as story decomposition. Now it's lunchtime, and here I'm indicating that lunch will be off-site since the team won't be working through their lunch hour. Now it's time to define the functional requirements, which will involve breaking down the stakeholder requirements even further according to what the system needs to do to enable that specific need. We'll use functional decomposition here as well. This section will mainly involve the business stakeholders, but here the IT representatives may provide input on feasibility and may need to ask clarifying questions to ensure they are understanding. For functional requirements, the business analyst will focus on where, when, and how related questions when using the 5 Ws and an H method. Any how related questions should be relating to the existing concepts such as business rules or calculations, not so much the implementation-based questions. This section is also where IT representatives will be tempted to discuss implementation. So the facilitator may need to give friendly reminders to focus on what the system needs to do versus how it will be implemented. There should be downstream JAD sessions that should have a design focus, which is where designs, solutions, and implementations can be discussed in detail. For agile environments, this agenda item will be equivalent to breaking down the stories into detailed acceptance criteria through story elaboration. Another thing to note about agile environments is that it will be unlikely for the list of stories and acceptance criteria to be defined in one workshop. Stories are generally developed iteratively with progressively smaller levels of granularity, while acceptance criteria should be defined just prior to allocating a batch of stories to a specific iteration or sprint. So there may need to be smaller, more frequent workshops. And finally, it's time for the in-session wrap-up. Here, the facilitator will give a general summary of what was accomplished during the current requirements workshop, including any deliverables or decisions made. Also, the action items and parking lot list will be summarized, followed by the next steps so that the attendees know exactly what to expect after the workshop. Well, there you have it, folks. This is what you need to conduct productive requirements workshops using the JAD method. If you learned something new, tell me about it in the comments. I'd love to hear your feedback. Also, be sure to check out all of the business analysis and BA certification training and resources we have for you at thebadoc.com. Thank you so much for watching. Have a productive and prosperous day, and I'll see you next time. Bye now.